Hello, and welcome to another episode of Shooting Straight, Living Life in Truth. I am your host, Charles, and today we're going to be discussing a topic that is pretty edgy. For me personally, it actually sits pretty close to my heart, um, and I'm doing this video for a few reasons. Mainly because of the fact that I've had several people ask me what my opinion of the abortion issue is. Personally, I don't understand why so many people have felt it important to know what I think about it. However, I don't usually discuss the topic in person for a couple of reasons. One, because people have a tendency not to really listen to what's being said, and they have a tendency to get offended and hurt, and then things get personal and things start getting disrespectful, and I just don't have time for that. The second reason, which really is the primary reason why I don't really discuss it in person, is because my my perspective and my viewpoint on the issue comes as a result of many years of experience, knowledge, study, and interpersonal relationships. And it's much too complicated for a casual conversation. So that's the main reason why I don't really discuss it, face to face with people. So I'm making this video for a third reason, which is I don't really want to have to say it a second time. Like I said, it's a complicated perspective. There's a lot of information involved, and I don't want to have to go through it all and tell it all every single time somebody wants to ask me what my perspective is on the issue. So I'm making this video to make that available. So anybody in the future that asks me or wants to know about it, I'm going to direct them to this video. But with that said, again, I want to reiterate that it comes from my perspective and my viewpoint on the issue comes from many years of study and practical experience. Part of that experience is when I was in the military for almost 2 decades, half of my time was spent as a medic. So I got a lot of training in medical science, anatomy, biology, physiology, and a lot of my perspective comes from that, and it's based on that, which is why the first half of this is probably going to seem pretty dry, pretty unemotional, and just more factually based, because I need to get that information out there and put that information out there because it literally is the foundation of the perspective that I have on this. So I can't really give you the perspective without laying the groundwork first. So if you bear with me, we'll get to the point where part comes from the heart, and I basically have a heart-to-heart kind of talk with you regarding the issue. But first, I got to get through the important stuff, the foundational work, so that you understand where I'm coming from and why I have the perspective that I do. Because it's honestly, it's probably going to offend people on both sides. And the only thing that I can say to that is I can only control what I say. I can't control how you receive it. So please listen with some open ears. Listen to hear. Don't listen for the sake of argument purposes, because that's not what this video is for. I'm going to provide you with my personal perspective, which is probably going to be a fresh perspective on the issue that you haven't heard before. And I feel confident saying that because, quite frankly, I've been hearing this issue now going on 45 years since I was aware of it. And I haven't heard these things talked about in any of the discussions that I've ever heard or witnessed or been a part of where the topic of conversation got onto abortion. So please just set your thoughts and your opinions aside and just and hear me for what I'm trying to say and what's being said, and consider it as a different perspective on the issue, because as a medic I've run into this issue on a few occasions, more than once. And it has affected people I've known, people I've been friends with, family. So it just, and like I said, even though the first part of this is going to seem pretty cold, pretty callous, and just a lot of factual information, I'm very empathetic on this, and I have a lot of compassion in my heart concerning this topic. Pardon me. So please just sit back, chill out, consider what I'm saying, consider the information that I'm presenting, and again, in the end, you make your own choices, you make your own opinion concerning this issue. I can't control that. I can't control how you receive it. I can only control my end of it. So with that said, let's go ahead and get into it, because there's quite a bit of information that I need to get to you. And one of the first things that I want to start going over with you is some definitions. And I want to go over definitions because some of these definitions you're going to need to be aware of in order to understand what I'm saying and what I'm getting at. And the first thing that I want to go over here, and I want to make sure that you're clear on, and you've probably heard these words before, and you probably already have an idea of what the definition is, but I want to give you the actual definitions and the way that they're actually used and considered in the medical environment. All right, so the first thing I want to go over is what's known as an invasive procedure. Okay, an invasive procedure, as you'll see here in just a second. There we go. All right. Invasive procedure is any surgical or exploratory activity in which the body is pierced by a device, instrument, or by manual digitation. Now, what do they mean by manual digitation? I'll give you an example. All right. When I was a medic working at Fort Campbell at Blanchfield Army Medical Center in the ambulance section, one of my partners was an older black male who had been in the field and worked as an EMT for over 30 years. It was a great privilege, a great honor to work with him. I learned a lot from him. I became the medic that I was largely because of him, and because of the fact that I took my job seriously, I took myself seriously, but more importantly, I took everyone else even more seriously, because everything that I did or didn't do could be the determination between life and death for someone else. So I took it seriously, and I became the medic that I was, largely in part because of the contributions of this particular partner. Well, one day he was sitting in the dispatch room having his lunch, and he had an incident of heart failure. Come to find out, it was congestive heart failure, and unfortunately he didn't make it. But in the 2-hour process of doing everything possible to try and save his life, one of the things that was done was to insert a catheter or a tube, all right, that would go into the pericardium and try to drain some of the fluid that was there. At one point, the instruments didn't actually puncture all the way through the pericardial sac, so they had to manually go with the finger inside and try and pop that membrane so that we could get that fluid out. And manual digitation, that's what that is. In another instance, you know, we had somebody that had a spontaneous pneumothorax. Well, I'm sorry, it wasn't a spontaneous pneumothorax. It was pneumothorax due to blunt trauma, and there was fluid building up in their lungs. So the doctors made the incision, got down to the pleural cavity that surrounds the lungs, where the fluid was building up at, and the instruments hadn't punctured it. So again, manual digitation, put his finger inside, found that spot, ruptured that membrane, and then we were able to relieve the pressure on the lung. That's what manual digitation is, just so that you understand that clearly. To continue the definition, a procedure in which the body is penetrated or entered by a tube, needle, ionizing radiation, or other method. Another way it gets defined a lot is a therapy that involves entry into tissues during which bleeding occurs. All right, so essentially an incision is having to be made, and you're having to pierce the skin. All right, that's known as an invasive procedure. All right, the counterpart to that is known as a non-invasive procedure, which you'll see here is not involving the puncture of the skin or other entry into the body. Set of diagnostic studies and procedures like x-rays, like eye exams, things like that. Those are non-invasive procedures. Anything that doesn't require penetration into the body. It's denoting a procedure that does not require insertion of an instrument or device through the skin or a body orifice or diagnosis of treatment. Not penetrating the body as by incision or injection, and not invading healthy tissue. All right. So why do I go over all of that? Well, that's going to become important later on, the more into this topic that we get. But I need you to have a comprehension and understanding of what those terms mean. All right. Some additional terms that you're going to hear, right? And I want to give you the actual literal definitions for these things. Contraception, all right? Contraception is birth control. We all know that, all right? It's the prevention of conception in the womb. Now, I bring this up because, quite frankly, this is the Latin root breakdown of what this word means, all right? Which means the word's been around for a long time. So, contra, obviously, is against, over, against, opposite, on the opposite side, on the contrary, contrary-wise, all right? Conception comes from an old French word, conception, right? Conception, grasp, comprehension, act of conceiving in the womb. From the Latin comes from conceptio, a comprehending or a conception, noun of action from past participle stem, right? To take in and hold, become pregnant. Another way of saying it is to take, or in essence to receive something. So here what we're seeing is contraception broken down into its roots, all right? Its root words and its prefixes and all that stuff. It basically means to prevent or to work against conception, or the receiving of life, or the reception or the taking of something. or the taking in of something. All right, which in this case happens to be pregnancy, conception of a child. All right. Let's do that same thing with the word abortion, because we just need to, right? If you look here, right down here, a compound word used in Latin for death, miscarriages, sunsets, etc. Most generally and most commonly used in reference to miscarriages, abortion. All right, the ab part is the stem of it. Appear, be born, or arise. All right. Later on, you get down here and you get into some more of this stuff. And if you notice, there's some dates down here going all the way back to 1540, right? So the concept has been around for a very long time. I'm a firm believer in the concept that there's nothing new under the sun. So if we have it today, then it's probably been around for a while. The meaning of it is product of an untimely birth, all right? And that was in the 1630s, all right? Abortment is attested from abortment from the 1530s, both archaic. Okay, so essentially what you're looking at is an untimely birth. Okay, another word that's similar to it is foeticide. Right, death of a fetus basically is what that is. Okay, so these are important words to comprehend and understand. And essentially, the meaning of the word abortion is an untimely presentation. It's associated with death. So there cannot be death without life. So if abortion is the untimely presentation of a dead fetus, then that fetus had to be alive, right? Just right there in the old term, you have some arguments there, all right? But that's the meaning of those words. Now, with those meanings taken care of and having gotten those established, I'm going to start getting into some of the biology here. Specifically on the anatomy side of things, because there's some anatomy and physiology that are important to understand the concept and where I'm coming from. Please don't go rolling your eyes or thinking, yeah, I know this stuff. Well, you may have been taught it at some point, but at some point you probably have forgotten about it. And some people have never heard about it. Some people have never received the information in their education. I can't assume that everybody understands this stuff and everybody knows this stuff. So that's why I'm having to go over it and why I'm presenting it to you guys. All right. So I'm going to begin with the foundational part of this, which involves cells in the body that are known as epithelial cells. Now, what exactly are epithelial cells? That's a good question. They're important. They fulfill important functions within the body and for the body. All right. Pardon me. Getting over my annual sinus inflammation situation, so a lot of that stuff is coming back up. Anyway, epithelial cells. They play an important function in the body. And I'm going to show you this right here. Right? Sums it up very quickly, very basically, and then I'll drop down and go over a couple other things. One of the basic types of tissues in a multicellular living thing, i.e. human beings, is epithelial tissue. It consists of epithelial cells which line the surfaces of the body. line the surfaces of the body. So one prime example of what epithelial cells are is if you think about your skin. Your skin is formed of epithelial cells. It creates a barrier between the exterior of the body and the interior of the body. And it gets into a little bit more detail here in this next paragraph. So the epithelial cells are tightly packed in various organ systems, such as your skin, right? You can also find these cells lining the airways in your respiratory system, blood vessels, urinary tract, digestive tract, and kidneys. Epithelial cells make up the lining of many tissues in the human body, packed tightly in sheets that create a barrier to the outside world and protect you. Okay? This breaks it down a little bit more. It says they act like gatekeepers. This keeps out environmental problems like dirt, bacteria, and viruses. Right? So it's part of your immune system. I know a lot of people don't think of epithelial cells that way or think of your skin that way, but it is. It's part of your immune system. Some epithelial cells also help with things like sweating and producing fluids and things like that. Some of them also have receptors. All right. Now, it's important that I go over these because, as you can see, there are epithelial cells in the female reproductive system, right? And the reproductive tract, right? Let's stay consistent with the article, right? The epithelial cells in the female reproductive tract play many important roles, including secreting hormones and growth factors. You can find epithelia, the plural for epithelium tissue, in a woman's ovaries, uterus, and oviduct, right? And they produce various types of hormones and other secretions that help with the reproductive process and stuff like in other things of that nature. All right, so now I want to show you this other one because they're, as you can hear, they perform a lot of different roles and a lot of different things. But the important thing that I need you to realize is that there are a multiplicity of different types of epithelial cells, depending on where in the body that you find them. Now, this diagram shows you some of those areas. As you heard earlier, it's in the lungs, or in the airway passages, which means you have them inside your mouth, inside your nose, inside your sinuses. You have them, lining the lung cavities themselves. Then you also have them lining your digestive tract, your esophagus, your stomach, your intestines. All of that stuff is lined with epithelial cells. The outside of your body is lined with epithelial cells in your skin. All right. So all of these different places and different roles that the epithelial cells play, all are important. All right. And it becomes even more important later in a few minutes when I show you some other diagrams. Right now, though, what I want to show you is something that I find to be an interesting conversation that's been going on for quite a while. And there's some debate over it, but the majority of scientists and medical scientists agree that sperm is alive. It does have a limited lifespan, but they do believe that it is a living creature. Now, I find that interesting because of the fact that, well, there's more to it. Let me just read this to you here real quick. This is one paragraph right here. It says, the debate basically is around whether or not you define it as being alive. Sperm cells have some characteristics of living organisms. They metabolize sugar to produce energy. They grow, mature, and they move on their own. However, they contain only half of the genetic information of a complete cell. Therefore, they can't reproduce on their own. That is the one thing that causes so many people to debate whether or not they're alive or whether or not it's a living actual organism, right? And the other part is that it has a limited lifespan. But how many of us, how many creatures, and how many living organisms really on this planet don't have a limited lifespan? We all of them die. We all die. We all have a limited lifespan. So to me, that's kind of a moot point when it comes to this. But anyway, so they can literally live for 5 days outside of the male body, right? So with that, let's get into a couple more things related to the anatomy and whatnot concerning the female anatomy, because as we start getting into talking about abortion and stuff like that, most of it and all of it is pretty much centered around the female, right? But I had to go over that little section of whether or not sperm is alive and whether or not they are living organisms, because it becomes important here in just a minute, and you'll understand why here in just a minute. But getting back to the conversation of epithelial cells, if you take a look at this particular 3D rendering from Digital Lab 3D, it's not something that I personally have done, but I wanted to show it to you because there's some important things that I need to show you related to this. So when you're talking about the epithelial cells and lining the surfaces of the body, you have to keep that definition in that concept front and center in your mind. And here's why. All right, if you take and you look at this diagram, right, all of this right in here is what most people would consider inside the uterus. Well, is it inside the uterus? Because all of that you're seeing right there are epithelial cells. And remember what the definition of an epithelial cell was? Just told you. They line the surfaces of the body, all right, and act as a barrier between the exterior of the body and the interior of the body. Just like our skin protects us from the environment, right? That's what epithelial cells do. That's their function, right? So if this whole thing is lined, all of this, all through here, and even in here, are lined with epithelial cells, and all through here in the vaginal canal is all lined with epithelial cells, pardon me, is this inside the uterus or is it outside the uterus? Interesting question, isn't it? Very interesting question. So if the epithelial cells line the surfaces of the body and protect it from the environment and from things getting into the body that could cause infections or cause other problems like that, what are we actually looking at? Is it the interior of the body or is it the exterior of the body? Well, in my mind, because of the fact that epithelial cells line the surface of the body and protect it from the exterior and protect germs and viruses and bacteria and dirt and other things from the environment from getting inside the body, I'm going to say that's outside the body. And here's why. All right. Let me pull that back up here. Yep. All right, let's bring that full screen here for you. So if you look at that, everywhere where those epithelial cells are on the uterine cavity, right? That would be exterior of the body. So everything on the other side of that, let me pull that image back up real quick and get that on the live screen so I can help you out with my mouse so you can actually see what I'm looking at and talking about. Sorry about that. So what I'm saying, this is all epithelial cells, all up and through here, all around here, and all down through here, right? So is this the outside or the inside of the body? Just see what I'm getting at? All right. So because the epithelial cells line the surfaces of the body and protect it from the environment and prevent dirt and bacteria and viruses and things like that from getting inside the body, then what we're actually looking at here is the interior of the body, and this is the exterior of the body. Told you it was a unique perspective, a fresh perspective on the issue, right? This is part of it. Okay, so all of this out here, all this pink and this fleshy tone stuff and everything, you know, from this epithelial lining, that real light lining right there, that real thin one right here, everything here going up is all inside the body. That's inside the woman's body. This is outside the woman's body. And you'll understand this concept here a little bit more later, all right? But I needed to get that concept into your head so you can be thinking about that for the moment, because there's something else coming up that you're going to need to understand just based on that, all right? Okay, let's bring this slide back up, because now we're going to start getting into some of the physiology of all of this, all right? And what I mean by physiology is this right here, okay? And this is also where it becomes important, the information about whether or not sperm is a living organism or not, all right? In order for a new life to be formed, in order for inception to take place, two gametes have to come together, right, to create that life, right? Now, what do I mean by gametes? Well, gametes are basically the ova and the sperm in this particular context, all right? The ova is generally considered as to be a non-living organism, right? It's incapable of reproducing, it's incapable of processing sugars, it's incapable of doing a lot of the things that scientists would use as criteria to consider it a living organism. So we have a non-living organism and we have a living organism in the sperm, right? Now my question to you is this: where does that sperm get its life? If it's created inside the male, where does it get its life? How is it a living organism? Well, I contend that part of the man's life essence is put into that sperm and gives it its life and makes it a living organism, which makes men a giver of life. It makes women a receiver of life. Remember the definition of conception? To take in, to take, to receive, basically. This is what we're looking at, okay? Men give life, women receive life. Now, once the sperm and the egg are united, we know that's fertilization, right? Then we end up with a cell that has two different nuclei. Once the DNA from the sperm unites with the DNA from the ova, we end up with two different nuclei, all right? It's a diaptic cell, right? That is the first sign of what's known as mitosis, right? Mitosis takes place within minutes to hours of fertilization having taken place. Now, at this point, mitosis has begun. I mean, as soon as the DNA strands from the sperm and the ova combine, mitosis is beginning. Pardon me. And mitosis is a process that is considered to be, by scientists, the first indication or the first sign of life. Mitosis, okay? It's a sign of life. Mitosis cannot occur when there is not life present. So here we are within minutes to hours of fertilization. And as soon as those DNA strands combined, the process of mitosis began. So life begins even before fertilization, because remember, the sperm is a living organism. That life is being given, and the ovum and the ova is accepting that life. It combines. Now we have a dioptic cell, which is all signs of mitosis. Mitosis begins to happen. Cell division starts to occur. And I keep doing that. And you end up with a multiple cell organism. As you can see, it goes through a various, set of phases, from 2 cells to 4 cells to 8 cells. It's exponentially replicating itself. It's not just doubling itself, but it's exponentially replicating itself. That's how 2 cells become 4, because each of those 2 cells is doing that cell division process, that mitosis thing, all right? So 2 cells become 4 cells. 4 cells literally would become 16 cells, because each one, doubling it would be 8 cells. That 8 cells would then become 16, etc., etc., etc. All right, it's exponentially compounding on itself, because each cell is replicating and creating a duplicate of itself. All right, then you get a manula, and then you get the blastocyst, and then the blastocyst implants itself into the lining of the uterus. Now, what lines the uterus? Epithelial cells, right? So now we're talking about, a pregnancy. Well, we're talking about pregnancy from the point of fertilization, but now that blastocyst, or the baby, the soon-to-be baby, the developing human life, is now implanting itself in the lining of the uterus, the exterior of the body. Okay, now let's take a closer look at what's going on when it implants itself. All right, I'm going to pull up another diagram here on the other page, because I need you guys, because I'm going to be pointing things out and stuff like that, so I need you guys to be able to see it, what I'm doing and where my arrow is pointing. So here we go. All right, now all of this down here in the basal plate, right, all of this is maternal. This is all mom right here. This is all uterus, right? This is the uterine lining right here. This is inside the uterine wall. All right, you have maternal veins, you have maternal arteries, you have uterine tissue, placental septum, right? All of this right here is placental septum. So all of that is acting as a barrier between the exterior of mom and the interior of mom. All of this out here is exterior of mom. All of this is interior mom. All right, this middle layer here, the intervillous layer, or intervillous space, all right, is made up of 2 things. One, it has villous trees, all right, which are blood vessels and arteries coming from the baby that extend out from the umbilici, all right, that reach down into this space that is filled with maternal blood. All right, See, maternal blood, all this light area right in here, all this light pink stuff you're seeing here, that's all mom's blood. And these Vias trees are acting similar to the way your lungs would when it's filtering air. Okay? So it's kind of like your capillaries. Oxygen comes in, capillaries allow the oxygen to pass through to get into the bloodstream, while at the same time passing carbon dioxide back out for the exhale. All right, this is essentially what's going on here. All right, so the placental area in this implantation has created this space for the baby to be able to filter and gain the nutrients that it needs in order to grow, right, from mom's blood. Which brings up another interesting point that needs to be considered when discussing this topic. Most of the time, mom and baby do not have the same blood type. It is possible for them to have the same blood type, and it happens all the time. But most of the time, mom and baby do not have the same blood type. That is another interesting and significant point to think about, because if baby's blood were to mix with mom's blood, then mom's blood would see it as being an invader, like a virus or a bacteria, and the immune system would kick in and begin to try and eliminate it. Okay? But that doesn't happen. Why? Because their blood stays separated, right? It's two separate bodies, two separate entities that are basically acting in a symbiotic relationship with each other. Okay? The mother presents some blood, the baby has the ability to filter that blood, and it all takes place right here within this intervia space for the baby to get what it needs. Right? Now, if you look at this chorionic plate, all right, and this is going to become important a little bit later, because it's part of what later becomes the amniotic sac. All right, but if you look in this chorionic plate, this is baby's blood vessels. This is baby's tissue. This is baby's epithelial right here. Okay, all protecting baby, which is up here, right? So you got arteries and blood vessels that come down into these areas where you have epithelial cells that all line here, which allow certain things to pass through and certain things not to pass through. This is what this whole section right here, the whole thing, all three layers, the chorionic plate, the intervia space, and the basal plate, this all makes up what's known as the placenta. Okay, which a lot of people think has the amniotic sac attached to it. Well, the placenta is part of the amniotic sac, and you'll understand why here in just a moment, because that term chorionic plate comes into play here in a little bit, because you have two different membranes that actually make up the amniotic sac. And as the pregnancy progresses and the development of the child advances, those two membranes actually merge together to become one, and then it's known as the amniotic sac. All right, and we're gonna get to that eventually. So now, the next thing I want to show you is, here we go. So I'm going to show you this, which is a close-up or more blown-up look from a different perspective of everything that we just discussed. All right. So what we have here is we have the chorion. See this pink layer right here? That's known as the chorion, or the chorionic membrane, right? This blue part here, right, is known as the amnion, or the amnion, or the amniotic membrane. All right. The chorion and the amniotic membranes will later merge to become one membrane known as the amniotic membrane. All right. You have your umbilical cord that runs from baby over into the placenta. All right. Here's your chorionic villi. Right. Remember earlier in that other diagram, this is where the blood vessels and the arteries from baby come. All right. And then you have your maternal portion of the placenta, i.e. the endometrium, which is where the blood and all that stuff from mom is at, that is being filtered by the chorionic villi. Right? But all of this right here is the placenta. And all of this is part of the lining of the uterus and for mom. And then all of this is part of the lining from baby. And if you notice, they don't touch, they don't merge, they don't connect. They aren't one. They're separate. They're separate by design. There's a natural separation between mom and baby going on here. All right. That's one of the important things that I was wanting to get across to you guys, because it all comes back to the perspective that I have on this. All right. Because in the next few, from here on out, now that we're understanding all of this, and that there is a natural barrier and a natural separation between mom and baby, and that the epithelial cells that line the uterus actually define the uterine cavity as the exterior of the woman's body, not the interior. It's actually the exterior of the body. All right. And just to illustrate that, and just to bring that home a little bit, all right, I have this boot here, all right, and I'm going to use this boot and say that this portion of the boot here would be like the uterus. This portion of the boot up here, yes, combat boot from Desert Storm, sorry. But this portion of the boot would basically be your vaginal canal, all right? So I can take and I can put my hand in here, and I can actually take and go all the way in to the uterine space, or the cavity inside that boot, right? Now, is my hand part of this boot? Is the boot part of my hand? Can I remove my hand from the boot? So they're not the same thing. If this is the epithelial lining, then all of this space out here would be the uterus and the woman's body. All of this space in here, in there, would be the exterior of her body. This is where we start getting into talking about abortion and the actual procedures. Because at this point, we've established that life existed from the time that life was given by the father through the sperm and received into the uterine cavity, where it inseminates or fertilizes an ova, which is not alive, and creates this new life form. Life is present. Life is present when the sperm shows up. Okay? So life begins even before conception, in my opinion, based on this data, based on this information, based on this science. You can agree or disagree. That's on you. I'm giving you what I know. Okay? Again, I control what I do and what I say. I can't control what you do or what you say or how you receive it. What I say. I'm just giving you the information that I know, shooting it straight to you. All right? Now, when we start getting into abortion, there are different types of abortions, different types of procedures that take place. All right? One of those procedures is known as a D&C, which looks something like this. All right. And what ends up happening, pardon me, is that the embryo, because it usually takes place 16 weeks or before, the embryo gets scraped from the lining of the uterus. Those epithelial cells,
Yeah.
the embryo gets scraped off of that lining using what's known as a curette, which here is referred to as a curettage. So let's show you what the whole procedure is. Okay. Here you have a speculum that gets inserted into the vaginal canal leading up to the cervix, where a dilator is then placed into the cervix, into the uterus, so that it's possible for the curette to make it inside, or make it to where the embryo is, right? Now, remember the definitions of invasive and non-invasive? Which particular type of procedure would this actually be? It was a bit of a trick question. I'll give you that. And it was something that took us a little while in our medical training to actually comprehend and get a grasp of, right? Which is why I'm posing the same question to you, right? So, is this invasive or non-invasive? Technically, it's non-invasive because we're not penetrating the skin. We're not penetrating the epithelial cells. However, because of the psychology of it and because of the fact that you're actually placing speculums and curettes and dilators into a bodily orifice, some people argue that it's an invasive procedure. I personally say that it's a non-invasive procedure, but it gets called an invasive procedure because of the psychological aspect of the procedure. Right? When, well, just think about everyday life. When people talk about sex, right? When they're talking to their spouses or whatever, right? A lot of times the lady is going to say, I want you inside me. That's how it's interpreted. That's how it's seen. That's what it feels like. It feels like this area is part of her body. The psychology of it makes it an invasive procedure, but in all technicality, it's a non-invasive procedure. That speculum isn't part of her vaginal canal, is it? No. The dilator's not a part of the cervix, is it? No. The curette isn't part of the cervix or the vaginal canal, is it? No, it's not. But what keeps it from entering her body is the epithelial lining that lines the vaginal canal, the cervix, and the uterus, creating this cavity that is an exterior portion of her body. So we're not invading her body when these instruments are used in order to do this. Now, let's get back to this, the procedural part of this. And as you can see, the dilator goes in, opens up the cervix so that the curette can go in and find where and this is what it was originally designed for, abnormal tissue on the lining of the cervix, or lining of the uterus. That curette then scrapes it off of there. Now, what's happening at the same time that this is being removed is that you're actually creating an abrasion on the epithelial lining. And what do I mean by an abrasion? Well, think about when you get injured, right? When you fall down, you fall down on some concrete, and you skin your elbow or you skin your knees. That's an abrasion, right? That's what's actually happening here. When they're removing this abnormal tissue or removing an embryo, you're actually creating an abrasion on that epithelial cell. So the same thing you got going on your external skin, the same thing you got. Let me pull this up. The same thing that you would end up having on your skin from falling on the concrete, that abrasion, is the same thing that is happening to the lining of the uterus inside that uterine cavity, which is outside the female body, outside the body, in the cavity. Okay, that epithelial cell, remember, surface of the body. So wherever the surface of the body is, it's scraping that surface to remove that abnormal growth, or to remove the embryo, depending on the situation and the reason and the purpose that it's being used for. All right. Other procedures, other methods and methodology of doing this, all right, is D&E, which is known as dilation and evacuation. It's usually performed 16 weeks or older. All right. There's a couple different ways that this actually takes place. One of them technically is illegal, and one of them technically isn't performed in the United States anymore. That one is this one, the dismemberment method, which is essentially where they insert a speculum, dilate the cervix like before, but then they go in with forceps and grab various parts and pieces of the body of the fetus and pull them apart and remove the fetus one piece at a time, removing the legs, removing the arms, removing part of the torso, removing the head, and eventually getting to where they remove the placenta. Right? It's very brutal, very ugly. And if you were to ever see it being performed on an ultrasound, you would see that baby moving around, squirming, trying to get away from it. And the next method is a suction method. All right. This is still legal. I'm not sure exactly why, but it's still legal. And it's still one of the ways that abortion is performed. And if you look at it, again, same thing happens. They insert a speculum into the vaginal canal. They use dilator to dilate the cervix so that they can get the suction cannula into the uterine cavity, at which point they turn the suction on. Pardon me. Once that suction is turned on, it pulls the amniotic sac, pulls parts of the baby into the cannula, which then is sucked out, pardon me, and gets collected into what's known as a collection jar. And as you can see, it still tears the baby apart. Still tears the placenta apart. Still tears the amniotic sac and the amniotic fluid apart. Still tears the baby apart. But it's not called dismemberment. It's called suction. It's called suction, which is considered a surgical procedure. One other thing, well, I'll get to that later if I can remember to do it. Now that we've gone over these different procedures and whatnot, there's one other procedure that has technically been outlawed in the United States. And that procedure is the partial birth abortion. The most grotesque, most violent, most stomach-churning method of abortion. And what you see on your screen is why. It's guided by an ultrasound. And I don't know if this was, I don't think this was the type of abortion that was depicted in Planned Parenthood. I don't think it was, or in Unplanned, the movie, the story about Abby Johnson, because I think this was outlawed before she was working at Planned Parenthood. But as you can see, this is just horrific. Speaking of which, if you've never seen that movie Unplanned, the Abby Johnson story, I highly recommend that you do. And the reason that I say that is because it tells the story of Abby Johnson, who used to work at Planned Parenthood and actually got to a point where she managed a clinic. But the day where she actually witnessed an abortion taking place, it completely changed her. It completely changed her. Because in that ultrasound, she could see the baby trying to get away from the instruments as the doctor was trying to abort the baby. If you haven't seen that movie, see it. Watch it. It's worth a watch. It's real. It's raw. And I commend her for doing it. And what I got here on your screen are some of the tools of the abortion trade. Some modern, some not so modern. This is a manual suction device, otherwise known as manual aspiration. This is what sucks the baby out, right, during the suction style procedure. This is the curette. This is what scrapes the lining of the uterus in order to remove the embryo. This is a syringe with a spinal needle on it. You can just imagine what that was used for. Forceps. This is what's used to go in and dismember and remove. Scissors. And here are some of your older versions of some of the same tools. They used to be used to do these things back before it was illegal, back before all the modern advancements that we have that have made it safer. Yes, I air quoted that, because I don't care what anybody says. These procedures are not as safe as they want you to believe they are. How do I know that? Because when I was a medic in the Army, there were a few times where I got called on an emergency call for someone hemorrhaging post-abortion. Oh, well, that's an exception. That's an exception. That's a rarity. That doesn't, that was something that somebody messed up on. That was a botching. Okay, I'll give you that. But nevertheless, still happened. Still unsafe. And even in situations where you have a highly skilled, highly trained physician who's doing the procedures, it doesn't take much for a complication to occur. It doesn't take much. I'm telling you. And I've responded to those calls. I've responded to situations like that where a woman's afraid she's going to lose her life because she's hemorrhaging so badly. This is the last thing that I wanted to show you on the tools of the trade. It was like way back when, right? Like in the 1700s, 1800s. These are chemicals that were used. Yep, you heard me. Chemicals. Chemicals that were used to abort a child. In the life, cause death, and a premature presentation of a baby. That's what it was used for. Which is reminiscent of this guy. Karl Klauberg. Auschwitz, Birkenau. Nazi Germany. This is the man who experimented on women. Not just Jewish women. Whatever women the Nazis happened to capture and sent to him. He used various chemicals and various things, researching and finding out what was the best way to sterilize women. And the brutality was just sickening of the things that he did. And he stood trial in the Nuremberg trials and were convicted for war crimes, crimes against humanity, for the stuff that he did. Using chemicals to cause sterility. And we're still doing it today. Yeah, they're still doing it today. This is basically what inspired the morning after pill that everybody wants to rave about. Yeah, the morning after pill used to be called something else. They outlawed it, and then they found other chemicals and other things that they could put together that would make it safer, that the FDA finally approved, and now it's called the morning after pill. But this is what inspired it. It's a chemical sterilization. It stops a pregnancy in its tracks the morning after with chemicals. Inspired by Karl Klauberg. Right? Now I want to talk to you about this lady. Little Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood. Yes, I'm going here. Because I'm going to tell you straight up right now. Planned Parenthood was a foundation and an organization and a business that has been established and founded on racist, Nazi-style ideologies. No, it wasn't. Well, that's been debunked. Oh, really? Well, let's find out. Because, as you can see, every last one of these quotes that are listed here has references where it can be verified. And when I'm done, I got something else to show you. Because, well, let me just show you. Here, watch this real quick. Alright, well, apparently the audio is not feeding through to you guys. My apologies for that. So what I will do is I will cut this video off. You guys can look that up. I'm sure you can find it. But here are some of the quotes. Alright. But from my view, I believe that there should be no more babies. Interview with John Parsons, 1947. The most merciful thing that the large family does to one of its infant members is to kill it. Woman and New Race, Chapter 5. The wickedness of creating large families. We don't want the word to go out that we want to exterminate the Negro population. Letter to Dr. Clarence J. Gamble, December 10th, 1939. Page 2. Yeah, I can hear it now. A lot of you guys know, no, that's been debunked, that ain't real. Really? And what do you call this? This is a letter to Dr. C.J. Gamble. Dated December 10th, 1939. Written by Margaret Sanger. And here's the paragraph where that quote comes from. And the sickening part about this is they went so far as to include ministers, people of the church who are supposed, I'm not even going to get started with this, but read this. The minister's work is also important. Also, he should be trained, perhaps by the Federation, as to our ideals and the goal that we hope to reach. We do not want word to go out that we want to exterminate the Negro population. And the minister is the man who can straighten out that idea if it ever occurs to any of their more rebellious members. Still think it's bogus? Still think it's bogus? There's a lot more where those quotes came from. A lot more. A lot more uglier ones too. But Planned Parenthood was established and founded on racist principles. Yes, sir. Racist principles. Nazistic principles, in fact. Because a lot of these quotes, she's talking about improving a specific race of people. I wonder who the race of people were. Care to guess? Look it up. Nazistic racist principles is what Planned Parenthood was set up on. The majority of their clinics are set up in low-income, impoverished neighborhoods. Why exactly is that? Why would they do that? Why would that be important to them? Part of their mission, maybe? Well, let's take a look at Planned Parenthood. Alright? Here we go. Here's Planned Parenthood's website. These are the services that they provide. Abortion services, abortion referral, birth control, emergency contraception, primary care, HIV services. And by the way, that primary care is not all that inclusive of primary care. HIV services, transgender hormone therapy, men's health services, which basically includes STDs, fertility, sexual dysfunction, birth control, and routine checkups. Okay. Patient education, pregnancy testing and services, STD testing, treatment and vaccines, women's services. Now, when you go looking through their website and trying to figure out, what their services are, how many of those services they do, what's their primary function, what's the primary services that they provide, it's hard to find them. I literally had to go into this report and go to page 26 and page 27 to find that information. Okay? Here we go. STI testing and treatment, i.e. STDs. All right? 4.5 million. Contraceptive services, 2.1 million. Cancer screenings and prevention, 416,000. Almost 417,000. Other reproductive health services, 1 million. Abortion services, 383,000. That's questionable. And you'll see why here in a little bit. But you have to do all this digging and go and find this stuff out. Okay? They aren't transparent about this stuff. They only put certain information they want you to know. And here's some abortion statistics for you. Total number of abortions in the United States from 1973 to 2020, 63.6 million abortions. That's 63.6 million babies, children that are not here. 63.6 million of the next generation haven't made it into this world. It's 186 abortions per 1,000 births. Live births. There's 20.3 abortions per 100 pregnancies according to the Guttmacher Institute. But take a look at this. Look at Planned Parenthood's funding. Their income breakdown for the 2020-2021 fiscal year. Government versus non-government income. $633 million in government funds versus $354 million in non-government funding. Here are the reasons why people are getting abortions. You know, they always want to bring up, what about rapes? What about incest? What about medical stuff? What about? They always want to bring this stuff up. When it first started taking hold in America, they said safe, legal, and rare. 63.6 million sound rare to you? 20 out of 100 sound rare to you? This particular website puts it as health-related reasons at 12%. Health-related being concerns about their health, concerns about the fetus's health, use of medications, other drugs, alcohol, or tobacco. Let's eliminate the medications, drugs, alcohol, tobacco part. Because when it comes to medical emergencies, those wouldn't be included in that. But you're still looking at 12%. 12%. That's it. All the rest of this is all socioeconomic reasons. This abortion is being used as contraception. Don't believe me? Look at this one. Victim of rape, 0.5%. Fetal health problems, 3%. Physical health problems, 4%. That's 7.5% of all abortions. Rape, incest, and medical issues, 7%, 7.5%. The remainder, socioeconomic reasons. In the state of Florida, here where I'm at, 74,868 abortions in the state of Florida in 2020. The reasons for those abortions: 0.01% pregnancy resulted from an incestuous relationship. 0.15% woman was raped. 0.20% woman's life was endangered by the pregnancy. 0.98% there was a serious fetal abnormality. 1.48% the woman's physical health was threatened by the pregnancy. 1.88% the woman's psychological health was threatened by the pregnancy. The remainder, socioeconomic reasons. I'm just not ready to be a mom. But my career. Reported annual abortions. Some of the why does that name always escape me? The Guttmacher Institute. Numbers here. They're the ones that actually contact the abortion clinics and find out their numbers directly. The CDC. These are the numbers reported to the CDC. Okay. 1973, the year of Roe v. Wade. And as you notice, just keeps going up and up and up and up until you get to about 1998. And you see something interesting here. Look at the huge difference in these numbers right here. You know what that asterisk is? It means that New Hampshire, California, and at least one other state did not report the number of abortions that they had that year. You notice it just rapidly drops. I wonder if that's because they're just not reporting the numbers. Why would they not report the numbers? Does that make any sense? And that I already showed you. So what does abortion cost us? What does it cost us? It costs us a lot. Little cliff notes here talking about Mensa and the genius status, right? Mensa basically considers a genius to be in the top 2% of the world, which usually means about 175 on an IQ test or higher. 2%, the top 2% are approved to apply for Mensa. Based on their standards, there's about 6 million people in the United States who would fit the bill of a genius. 6 million. Right here in this country alone. Around the world, there's 130 million worldwide who would qualify for Mensa. Of those, only 50,000 are a part of Mensa here in the United States. 50,000 of the people from around the world have joined Mensa. So based on that number, 2%. How many geniuses have we lost out on since 1973? 63.6 million, 2% of that. Basically works out to be about 1.2 million geniuses that we've missed out on. Which one of those would have cured Alzheimer's? Which one of those might have cured dementia? Which one of those might have cured cancer? Which one of those might have found a better method of contraception? Which one? We'll never know. Throwing on top of that, the fertility rate in the United States has been steadily dropping since 1800. The better our medical care gets, the lower our birth rates get. Had that one little spike there when the baby boomers were born, right there after World War II. It dropped dramatically to the point where a woman would only have 1.77 children in her lifetime in 1980. Went up a little bit there for a little bit, kind of plateaued a bit, around 2 children per woman's lifespan. In 2020, it's back down to 1.78. 1/100th of a point below, or above, the lowest birth rate in recorded history for America. How much has abortion contributed to that number? And if a woman's only having 1.77 children, or 1.78 children in her lifetime, how much more is that affecting America when we're having 1 million or more babies aborted a year? Take a look at this. Adoptions. Okay. It's an option. It's an option that Planned Parenthood doesn't push very often. They'd rather do the abortion than have somebody adopt. I had some other websites. I forgot to put them up here and prep them for you guys, and for that I'm sorry. But it showed other women's health care facilities not only had abortion, but pregnancy. Not just pregnancy, not just pre-pregnancy, not just gynecological type stuff, not just OB type stuff, but all general health. All general health. All services that you would expect from primary care, to include all the pregnancy services and everything else. And they also had information about adoption. And make a lot of adoption references. Now look at these numbers, right? Look at these numbers from 1944 to 1975. 2 years after Roe v. Wade kicked in, right? Adoption numbers were going up and up and up and up and up. So right around 1971, when they started going down, when feminism hit, and they started getting into all these other ideas about abortion and pregnancy and my body, my choice kind of stuff. And look what happened with the numbers for adoption. They dropped dramatically. Why do I bring that up? Why do I find that important? Look at this. Look at this right here. Right? How many people are waiting to adopt a child in the United States of America? It's estimated between 1 to 2 million couples in the United States want to adopt a baby. Every year, there are around 1.3 million abortions. And only 4% of the women with unwanted pregnancies place their children through adoption. Only 4%, huh? Just taking a nice even round number here, 1,300,000. And finding out what that 4% is. I mean, it's 52,000 out of 1,300,000 plus babies are delivered for adoption. And there's 1 to 2 million couples looking to adopt. Why is this important? Why do I even bring this up? Well, remember I told you, I was a medic in the Army. Half my time I was in the Army for. During that time, I had friends who had miscarriages. During that time, I had friends who found out that they were infertile, couldn't have kids of their own. And I can't tell you the agony and the suffering that they went through psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually as a result, because they really wanted them. One couple I actually got to adopt, but it took them 8 years. 8 years to be able to adopt a child. Why? Supply. There's more demand for adoption than there is a supply. So every time a child gets aborted, that's one more couple that has to wait even longer to be able to adopt a child. Why should they have to suffer because you're not ready to be a parent and you want to end the life instead of giving it up for adoption? I've shown you where the medical science shows that it's not your body. So it's not your body, your choice. It takes 2 of you to make the baby. It takes the life of a sperm given by a man to fertilize a dead ovum for a human being to be created. If you're not willing to protect and nurture the life that a man is going to give you, then keep your legs closed. It'll prevent you from getting pregnant. It'll prevent you from getting STDs. It'll prevent a lot of things. If you don't love that man's life, if you don't respect that man's life enough to protect it, then don't have sex with him. Guys, if you don't trust her to take care of it, if you don't trust her to nurture it, and you think she's going to kill it, don't give her your life. Both parties have to be responsible. You can't just go out and have sex willy-nilly and expect there not to be issues. People have died from abortions. Babies have died from abortions. People are suffering psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually because they can't adopt children. And they want to desperately, but can't have their own. But because you don't want your career ruined, you're going to kill the baby that they could have adopted? Mm-mm. Abortion is selfish, it's racist, and it's fascist. And it was never intended to be contraception. It was intended to be a life-saving procedure to save life. Not to give you free license to go out and have sex with whoever you want, whenever you want, just because you feel like it. Just because you don't want a baby doesn't mean other people don't. The LGBTQI plus whatever communities, they can't have their own babies. Not unless they blur the lines and have sex crosswise, male, female, because that's how babies are made. So the only way they're going to be able to have a baby is if they adopt. If you support them, then why are you aborting your baby? You say you're fighting to protect the rights of future generations? Well, if you're killing them off and you're not having the babies in the first place, what future generation are you fighting for? Abortion has its place. It has its place as a life-saving procedure that is a last resort, not your first option as contraception. Now, I told you I forgot to mention something earlier on in this presentation. I'm going to bring it up now. It's just one more key piece of evidence that shows that mom and baby are two separate entities. And it's not your body, mom. It's baby's body. Because inside that amniotic sac is amniotic fluid. That fluid is made up of various nutrients and various things like that that the baby needs to survive. And it drinks it. And it breathes it. It gets its oxygen from there, along with some other stuff. But here's something else that's also in that amniotic fluid. Baby's urine and baby's feces. Do you know it keeps that urine and that feces in there with baby and keeps that amniotic fluid in there with the baby? Epithelial cells that create that membrane, the amniotic membrane. If you were to take and perforate your intestines, you'd be actually slicing through epithelial cells, allowing fecal matter from your intestines to enter into your body. You know what that would create? That would create an internal infection, which could potentially lead to sepsis, because you let something from the exterior of the body into the interior of the body. If that amniotic fluid got into your body, the same thing would happen. You create an infection and cause sepsis. But it doesn't, because of the amniotic membrane, which is made of epithelial cells, which the lining of the uterus is made of, and the lining of the vaginal canal is made of. There is a natural separation and a natural barrier between mom and baby. It's two different people, two different blood types, two different living environments. It's not your body, and it's not your choice alone. It's the Father's life. And the father has a right to have a say in what happens to his life. If you don't want the child and the dad does, then let the dad raise it. And you can go on with your life and carry on with your career, make your money, build your home. Do what men are supposed to do. If that's what you really want. But that man has a right to have a say in what happens to the life that he gave to create that baby. It's not your choice alone. Because it's not your body. You helped create it, but you didn't do it by yourself. You can't reproduce by yourself. You need a man's life, a man's sperm, in order for a baby to be created. You can't do it without it. Otherwise, you got an immaculate conception, and there's only one of those that I know of in the history of the world. And your name ain't Mary. And if it is, well, unless you gave birth to Jesus, you ain't having an immaculate conception either. And you still need a man's sperm in his life in order to create a baby. But you're not creating that baby. God's creating that baby. He's forming that baby. And the life that's given to it is given to it through the man. You're nurturing it and protecting it in a safe cavern, in a safe cavity in which your body envelops it to add protection, a protective layer, a cushion, a protection from the exterior world. Meanwhile, the baby has its own protection from the exterior world, just like you do. But it's two separate beings. And an abortion ends life by the mere definition of the word. Death, early presentation. You're killing life. But again, like I said, it has its place. It has its place when it comes to saving lives. But it was never meant or designed to be contraception. I'm going to leave it at that. I'm sure there was probably some things I missed. Like I said, there's a lot of information, a lot of things that I could go over with this, because this is decades worth of information and things that I've accumulated over time, experiences, etc., that go into my perspective on this. There is a place for abortion, but that place is not contraception. Be responsible with what you've been given. Ladies, one of the most valuable things that you possess is your ability to protect and nurture life. One of the most valuable things that men possess is the ability to give life. We can't give life or create that life. Pardon me. Without you ladies receiving that life and doing what you do, doing what you've been designed to do. You have an intrinsic natural value that men don't have because of your abilities to nurture and protect life. Respect yourselves. Handle things responsibly. There's no need for all of this. There's no need for all of this suffering. And it can be stopped just by being responsible. That's that's all I'm going to say at this point. But now you know. My experiences cover the entire gamut of this topic, and I could sit here for weeks and days and talk and discuss this issue. But I've given you the foundation and the basics and all the purposes and the reasons why I think the way I do concerning abortion. And not much of it is what you normally hear. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you learned something. And for now, you guys have a great weekend.